Namaste and welcome to another episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. I'm your host, Roshan Karyappa. With me today, I have a very special guest, Mr. Sivkumar Surampudi, who is the group head of the agri and IT businesses at ITC Limited, which is one of India's best known conglomerates. We're going to be talking to him about Indian agriculture, which has come a long way over the last 2-3 decades and is seeing some exciting reforms underway currently. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, sir. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here with you.
Right. So maybe to begin things, we hear a lot about the state of agriculture in media and in op-eds. We ourselves, as I mentioned, we've done a couple of podcasts as well. But I'd love to understand from you how you see the sector and, what are the top issues facing the sector?
Yeah, if one looks at a slightly longish term view, since you started by saying we have come a long way, I think the most critical accomplishment of Indian agriculture sector is that we have become a self-sufficient nation in food compared to a situation where we were literally living ship to mouth. Right. In fact, today we are a net exporter of food. I think that would be a major accomplishment. And the other thing is also that agriculture provides livelihood to more than half the population of the country. So I think these are on the positive side. But at the same time, if you look at what we are grappling with, firstly is that while it is providing livelihood for so many people, the per capita income of a farmer is barely 1/4 of any other source of livelihood in the country on average. So I think that is one serious issue. The other is that, while not only just labor, we also make use of lots of other resources, like 90% of all fresh water, half of all the land, a fifth of all our electricity, lots of government subsidies. So a lot of other resources are also consumed. Yet we only contribute from agriculture sector only less than 15% of the GDP. That means obviously the productivity is low. But even these low per capita incomes will come under further stress. One, because our natural resources are depleting, right. Water, topsoil, and things like that, with an added stress that we also have from the climate change, the extreme weather episodes, too much of rains in summer, very dry winters, and occasional droughts, and so on. So that unpredictability is another major challenge for agriculture. So it's low incomes and the risks and productivity. These are the kind of issues that we need to deal with.
Right. So you made a very relevant point, which is that, by some estimates, I think 50 to 60% of the Indian population is involved in agriculture. And yet, we see less than 15% contribution to GDP. So a lot of people say that, hey, you have to move many of these people away from agriculture to some other, industries and so on and so forth. Are you also of the same opinion, or do you believe that, Indian agriculture itself can be made more remunerative?
Yeah, interestingly. So in any case, I think we need to create more jobs in manufacturing and services sector for the youth who are coming up and who would be looking for employment opportunities. But independent of that, we also need to, I talked about the various resources we are consuming. If so much of resource and so many people are deployed, we have to raise productivity and make it more remunerative. So that headroom certainly exists. But what is also interesting is that there are many other jobs, be it entrepreneurial roles or employment through some kind of network along the agriculture value chain itself, which is both an opportunity to create jobs, both in the inbound value chain as well as the outward value chain, as well as raise the incomes of the farmers. So agri-services is somewhat a bypassed sector so far, because agri-services for all practical purpose are provided by the government and literally free of cost. So that sector did not emerge in terms of how to make it more knowledge intensive and how to bring information, coordinate with inputs, and same thing on the output side, as well as some local manufacturing opportunities closer to agriculture, certain kinds of inputs like planting material, which also will strengthen the farms, post-harvest operation. I think in addition to raising incomes of the farmers, there is plenty of headroom for that. There is also a huge opportunity to create what can be called agri-services kind of jobs, as also related manufacturing jobs within the agriculture value chain itself. And of course, outside, we in any case need to also create more jobs for the youth now.
Right. So let's double click on the productivity aspect, which you mentioned, right? And you mentioned, like, I mean, maybe the stakeholders themselves have to reinvent their roles, right? I mean, the farmer may have to think more as a businessman per se, right? And then you have the product side of things, which is like, maybe we need to do crop rotation and so on and so forth, right? So can we talk about, both these aspects and a few examples of how productivity can be increased both on the product side and the sales side of things, sir?
Yeah, no, if you have to look at why is agriculture unremunerated, productivity is one component of that. There are two very broad reasons for this. One is inherently agriculture has a huge amount of risk, both at a production level as well as at a price level. Weather has a significant implication on the production. And it's to start with, it's a commodity market, and therefore volatile prices have an impact on the output. At the time of planting, when the crop is harvested 90, 100, 120 days or whatever much later, when the farmer brings the produce to the market, there's uncertainty with respect to price. So these inherent risks, we haven't really created reliable risk management solutions yet. So the risk-taking ability of a farmer ends up being very low. So in addition to the low risk-taking ability of the farmer, because we haven't really created appropriate risk management solutions, the other challenge is that the farmer income also is lower because of the disconnected value chains that we have. Historically, we created a production-driven system because we were a shortages economy. As a result, the market linkages between the consumer and the producer has not been very strong. So what happens is that out of a consumer price, the farmer share tends to be relatively lower because there is a lot of margin and costs which go on in between. And so both the combination of a low risk-taking ability and low incomes obviously will mean a lower investment into farming, which leads to lower productivity. So farmers generally settle for a lower level equilibrium, barring a small percentage of farmers. So low productivity obviously creates that kind of a vicious cycle: low risk-taking ability, low investment, low productivity, lower income, and therefore I think this cycle continues. So therefore, I think the effort that needs to go in to raise the ability to take risk or support the farmer with productivity-linked investments. I think a lot of programs which happened in the past, like a lot of subsidies which are given in the form of planting material or for the nutrients like fertilizers and water, electricity, many forms of subsidies which are given is dealing with one aspect. But if on the other side, you are not creating the issue of how do I deal with the risk on the production as well as market risk, as well as the disconnected value chains, then all this input which is going into the farm then obviously comes out with no result. So therefore, the effort needs to be in an integrated form in terms of how do you really create a connected value chain, as well as then support on the investment side. And investment obviously has to come in together with the knowledge of farmer combined with the science. So I think it was no silver bullet, and that's the reason we have not been able to solve it for so long. How do you create an integrated effort both on the risk as well as on connecting value chains is what can lead to better incomes for the farmers.
Right. So one of the ways the government has tried to solve this income issue is through MSP and things to that effect, right? There's a huge amount of price control in agriculture, and also it's a bit of a hot button issue. I mean, people start protesting if onion prices go up, for example, and so on, right? And there is no real supply demand dynamics playing out in that sector. So how do you suppose that we can build those elements of supply and demand within the sector?
See, basically MSP, yes, it's a good signal at the time of planting as to what price the farmer will get at the minimum after harvest. But by virtue of the infrastructure that got created and the actual procurement that happens, the total MSP access is only to less than 10% of the farmers. While technically we announce MSP for 23 different commodities, for all practical purposes, it is limited to rice and wheat, that too in just about 3.5 states. And only recently we have seen a decent procurement action also in pulses and a little bit in oilseeds. So how do we really mirror something like this in the market is a more sustainable solution. Because if we expect government to provide an MSP for more commodities, that is also unpractical, as also unsustainable from a financial perspective. So how do we build market-based solutions for signaling prices ahead of planting? Is typically through two angles for two kinds of commodities. So one is for general commodity crops, the derivative market needs to come through, the futures and the options. So options are exactly like MSP, except that it is more market oriented, linked to demand, it will come through. So deepening the depth of derivative markets is an important thing for certain kind of commodities. So we have exchanges built over the last few years, and options have also been permitted more recently, and options devolving on the physical commodities is also a new reform which was done earlier this year. So I think all of this lay building blocks towards deepening the derivative markets. The other side is potentially contract farming to retailers, through food processors, any other system which kind of consumes products which are more perishable. Because it is difficult to create derivative market for perishables unless we have an advanced processing industry. And because it's difficult for the farmers to hedge a perishable commodity and deliver and create that kind of convergence. So for those commodities which you can't use derivative markets as is, you need to expand the food processing investments and logistics so that some of those customers can write contracts with the farmers with forward prices. So these two mechanisms will help in getting the prices before planting for the farmer. Otherwise, we will continue with farmers planting crops based on last season's prices.
Right.
And therefore, everybody will plant similar crops at the same time, leading to a glut. And then people obviously suffer because of that. And people walk away from certain crops, which leads to rise in prices. So this is besides the weather risk, which can again play through on. So on top of that, this issue also exists unless we create deeper derivative markets or the food processing sector.
Right. So I want to get to the recent reforms that were announced and what their significance is. But before we go there, I want to again understand a little more in detail on the food processing thing that you mentioned, right? By some estimates, around 40% of the food that we produce is wasted. And, as you rightly mentioned, this whole supply chain component is a key part of the whole ecosystem per se, right? So what is it that we can do to improve, let's say, warehousing and, these storing facilities and so on?
So I think that's exactly where your reforms also come in. So in some sense, both come together. The question and the question that you wanted to ask before that, in a sense, roll into one. because obviously more investments will come when they become commercially viable. And unless they are commercially viable, even if government gives plenty of subsidies like they have done over the years, typically the investments happen, infrastructure comes in, and it remains unutilized. Because once again, it needs to be dealt with integrated. You create a food processing capacity, you create a warehousing and logistics capacity. And if right kind of crops, right varieties are not produced, and they are not also produced around the year of different crops at the back end, then the food processing investments will not get utilized and will go unviable. Lots of food processing investments got shut down over time. So at the same time, you produce more crops which are perishable and the investment is not ready. So how do you really create an integrated approach? Once again, is relevant here. And so there is, as part of the new reforms, one of the things which is also done, we can say partly reforms and partly the financial package as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat effort in the recent times, is the Agriculture Infrastructure Fund. Not only for agriculture, but for horticulture, fisheries, and the whole diverse range of crops that got created, including something for micro-food enterprises. So that strengthens the post-harvest operation of the farmer. When that cost from the total investment is reduced, the investments also tend to be more viable from the other end of the processing and the consumption, the whole logistics infrastructure and the processing. So that is one way to improve the viability which has happened. The other concern that people tended to have is that when you make investment, whether because of Essential Commodities Act or for other kinds of controls which are imposed, then the total volume that you can store or buy gets restricted. Again, it leads to unviability. Therefore, as part of reforms, when there is exemption from Essential Commodities Act for certain products and for certain value chain players, that sword which is hanging on the heads of potential investment is also opened up. I talked about how do you make this whole effort integrated, that you get the crops of right varieties as also the investments in processing. So that was really getting limited because of the earlier mechanism of APMC, where it is a post-production price discovery mechanism, which has its role. I mean, certainly, they played a great role in the past, and they'll continue to play an important role going forward also. But post-production price discovery mechanism has a limitation because the relationship between a farmer and a customer becomes very transactional. So how do you then engage with a farmer to get the right varieties planted, to coordinate production and further processing and consumption without the wastage due to lack of infrastructure? So that coordination happens now with the other reform that is done now, both in terms of trade and commerce facilitation, which allows a direct engagement with the farmer and any potential buyer outside the mandi system. And the ability to write contracts, and then the new Farming Agreement Act strengthens some of the areas in favor of the farmer so that the concerns in contract farming are also dealt with from a farmer's perspective. So I think these reforms really enable this integrated approach and a much better coordinated value chain, as well as removing the fears of larger investment and improve the viability. So I think that is the kind of a thing which has to happen to reduce that wastage and improve the value. And fortunately, with rising incomes of the urban consumers, the consumers are seeking newer products, both in terms of variety of consumption, the quality and the food safety, can afford to and are willing to pay. And it's a question of connecting these to the market and plowing it back to also raise the incomes of the farmer, in the process create business opportunities so that these are sustainable, market-oriented solutions that come into play.
Right. So I think many of the aspects of the reform are considered thinking that the farmer is an entrepreneur, right? I think it's the first time we're looking at the farmer as a businessman and an entrepreneur. And one of the key aspects to this reforms is the market linkages, as you mentioned, right? Things like, being able to enter into contract farming with private players, interstate trade, so on and so forth. Can you speak about how this could be a win-win for both, let's say corporates and for the farmers?
So a very important other initiative which is taken as part of this broader agri package is also the new guidelines for FPOs, the farmer producers organizations. Because obviously there is going to be a certain back foot from which a farmer engages with the rest of the value chain because of the small size. And so collective is one way to engage with the rest of the value chain and improve the bargaining power. So therefore, FPOs is an important mechanism. FPOs, of course, India has been at it for the last several years. Very few have been successful. Large numbers haven't really been really delivering the purpose with which they have been set up. So keeping all that experience in mind, the new guidelines got created in terms of how the cluster should get formed, what is the cluster-based business organization support, which will provide shared services to these FPOs, direct participation of value chain players as anchors. So I think many of these initiatives, together with funds that have been set aside for capacity building, for governance of these FPOs, I think all the elements that will go into strengthening farmer power through FPOs is one route that can certainly enhance the farmer's ability to participate in the markets which are getting created. In any case, what happens is that companies going in from the processing or from retail side or for other agribusiness side cannot look at cheating the farmer overnight and hope to sustain a business in the long run. So therefore, they will have to also create a reciprocal dependency that if I go and create a raw material for my factory won't run by shortchanging the farmer interest.
Right.
So it is always in creating that reciprocal dependency that the long-term sustenance works for both. So that certainly exists as the opportunity to create this win-win. But on top of that, the new farming agreement, the way it has been created now, is that one of the concerns that the farmers traditionally had is that I write a contract and should something go wrong, I am not able to supply the produce and will my land be taken away? So things like that have been now supported through the new agreement saying that land cannot be taken away at any cost. So similarly, the standard terms template which is given so that the empowerment is also created through that act. The other issue in the farming agreement is that typically when you have a contract like this, when there are disputes, the concern on part of the farmer is that, no, I can't go and fight in a court of law with a large corporate. And so a new mechanism was also prescribed in this new act that one doesn't need to go to the court and fight a protracted legal battle. You can actually create a conciliation as well as a resolution mechanism with the district administration. Of course, even there are some question marks saying that how well this will function. Is there a capacity with the district administration to do it? So possibly a newer solution which is being discussed now in terms of creating a farmer's court, much like a consumer court, could be a good fast-track mechanism to deal with if there are any disputes. So I think solutions like that will emerge. And only then, of course, the contract farming will expand. But the starting point is that without really benefiting the farmer, no company can think of creating a long-term business proposition there. And vice versa. So therefore, it has to be inherently a win-win kind of an opportunity to really sustain in the long run.
Right. So we've spoken about reforms from a policy and regulation perspective. Let's move to another aspect of reforms, which is technology reforms as such, right? We see, many multi-billion-dollar companies being created at the end of the value chain, let's say in food ordering and, things to that effect, right? But we're yet to see the role of like these kind of disruptive technologies earlier in the value chain as such, right? So I wonder how you see the role of agri-tech in this entire, equation.
No, agri-tech is certainly one of the core reasons why the optimism exists in the sector. Because we have small farmers distributed across a large part of the country, each one very heterogeneous. So you need to deliver a solution which is very personalized, and yet it needs to happen on a scale. So the only way you can do it is by leveraging digital technologies. So the hope certainly stems from what technology can do, and therefore this is also an integral part of these reforms. The trade and commerce facilitation recognizes the role of technology platforms. So technology platforms have two very broad roles. One is, we talked about how do you make our production system more demand responsive. So transmitting the demand signals and these pricing mechanisms that we talked about ahead of planting is one role. The second role is in terms of how do you raise productivity through precision farming, despite our farmers being small and heterogeneous. So whether you need to get real-time information like hyperlocal weather forecast, or whether you need to get something which is supported by remote sensing and get advanced predictability of a potential disease that might impact or a pest which is coming, or whether you look back at how the farm has responded to various inputs and create an advisory on the nature of inputs that need to get used for the best output, or whether it is technology-enabled equipment for more precision application of inputs, whether it is micro-irrigation or drone-assisted spraying and all that, which also reduce the drudgery of the farmers, particularly women labor, who are involved in many of these kinds of activities. Or simple thing like image processing of leaves and plants to identify the potential stress and therefore what action could be taken. Or on-farm assessment of quality through various equipment which is embedded with machine learning with different kinds of samples. The whole host of things which can really potentially transform.
Right.
But the reason why they are not at scale, the reason why we don't see unicorns yet, while plenty of them can come up sooner than later, I see as three different issues which need to get tackled. One is the technology has to translate into real money for the farmer. And so that effort is still underway. So if you have about 600 agri-tech startups which are in this effort, I would say that about 30, 40 of them have become slightly more mature in translating a great technology idea into more money in the hands of farmers. So that is one aspect, which also together has to come for them in terms of how do you create a business model on top of delivering value to the farmer. So that is one aspect which needs to get further refined in their own journey. The second is many of these are point solutions or point products. So it is not enough to say that I have a hyperlocal weather forecast that gives you exactly what's going to happen over the next 1 week on your farm. By itself, it is solving something, but it's not translating into more money in the hands of the farmer. You need to then go on with, therefore, what do I do? If I need to do this, then where do I access my credit? If I access credit, then how do I deal with my risk? So things like that is a continuous activity that the farmer needs to tackle. And therefore, you need a solutions integrator to put all these solutions together from a farmer's perspective. So that, for example, is the role that ITC eChaupal 4.0 is working on, and also deliver them on ground to the farmers by hand-holding, because it's not just enough having a digital solution, because only so much penetration of smartphones or literacy and the farmer's own ability to self-service. So therefore, it needs to be a on-ground delivery mechanism as well. That is the second element. And lastly, is that a lot of core data elements need to be built as a common platform. And ideally, government is placed to do it, because the individual farmer identification, much like the Aadhaar identity, each farmer identity together with land coordinates, as well as the crop basics. So these need to be the core data layer, which the government can set up. And among the package that I was talking about, so this is also something government is in the process of doing, what is called the early consultation that has been happening. I happen to participate in some of those discussions. So as the Indian digital ecosystem for agriculture, so that has been conceived by the Ministry of Agriculture, and a task force is working on creating this layer of data, which can then engage with the rest of the app services and the solutions integrators, so that the scalability becomes far easier. If a solution is well tested in one geography, one crop, how do you take it instantly all over the country is through this kind of a support. So I think all of these elements are falling into place, and we will definitely see technology getting harnessed for the benefit of the farmer. On one hand, creating lots of business opportunities, potentially throwing up several unicorns still in this sector.
Fantastic. You happen to mention briefly the eChaupal, the digital infrastructure that you've created at ITC, and you've championed this yourself, right? Can you take us through the journey, sir, of building this initiative?
Yeah, I mean, earlier this year, we completed 20 years. Like I just mentioned, we are in what we call the ITC eChaupal 4.0 round of action. This conceived in 1999, first rolled out in 2000, was what we now call version 1.x series. Is essentially reorganizing the agricultural value chains to both raise farmers' incomes at one end and create new business opportunities for us at the other end. So from simple things like reducing the costs of transaction for the farmer to sell by discovering price in the village through internet-based price discovery with a local quality assessment mechanism. That was the entire 1.x series, which also went into how do you preserve identity of produce of the farmer when you directly source for them from them, so that the consumer gets a value-added product through appropriate varietal blending and so on. So Ashirwad brand, for example, of atta and many other agricultural products is a result of 1.2 effort of how do you really create that kind of a match. And traceability back to farm practices in aquaculture, that is now through an ITC MasterChef frozen prawns in the domestic market. It's a sizable export business with that kind of traceability assurance is 1.3. So a whole host of value chain reorganizations all the way up to 1.6 in dairy, fruits and vegetables and so on is that reorganization in 1.x. Subsequently, over the subsequent 3-4 years, using the same platform, we realized that the reverse flow of goods and services can happen on the same platform and the network of agricultural extension, agri inputs, financial services to the farmers in terms of insurance and credit facilitation and all of this, as well as the consumer goods flow into rural markets. So that whole series is 2.1 to 2.8. So the 2.x series was the next round. So sometime along the road, we saw that with some of those partners who are riding on this network, there are as many as 160 different partners ride on the eChoupal network to bring their products and services to the farmers and rural consumers. And we saw that together with some of those select partners, we create an ecosystem and offer this whole ecosystem as a service to the fourth parties. So I think that kind of an effort is what went through the 3.x series for Uberized farm equipment services, for vocational skill building services, for brand building and healthcare. So some of these are still scaling. So as that was happening, the digital advancements have created the opportunity for 4.0, and how many models we'll create within this, we will still discover. Last year we started, we saw this opportunity that many startups are coming with their interesting solutions, but there's a need for a solutions integrator, and with on-ground network that we already have, a digital platform which appropriately retuned can host these solutions and from a farmer's perspective and translate them into more income for the farmers. And so that effort is now underway. So that's been the whole journey in terms of starting with simple value chain reorganization to a complete solutions integrator. And of course, the vision also is to, much like you've done in 2 and 3, also do it for non-agri activities, because one of the reasons that the youth is moving away from agriculture as a source of livelihood besides the unremunerative farming is also the dignity of labor that is involved in farming activity, the quality of life in villages. So therefore that broader aspect also needs to be engaged with, so that the overall quality of life goes up in the villages, as well as through this tech assisted farming, the dignity of labor also goes up. So therefore the other dimensions also. So that's how we are conceiving and expanding 4.0. And both the startup ecosystem on one side, as well as the data layer from the government to support is the right kind of opportunity to expand this role that we are playing now.
Right. So, if we were to trace our steps back, I mean, you built this, much of this that you built were not when, regulation, logistics or infrastructure were as favorable. I'm sure you must have more than a few stories to recollect about, overcoming some of these challenges and so on.
Yeah, the regulation was obviously the first issue. When we conceived it, APMC, the first reform hadn't also happened. So we were to think out of the box to solve these problems of Indian agriculture and create business opportunity for us. But that literally meant thinking outside the four walls of Mandi. And that by design was not legal in that framework. And so we had to engage with the states, explaining how the spirit of what is being attempted through the eChoupal model is what is serving the purpose with which the APMCs got created, and even more so. So to engage with each state government and demonstrate it and then get it reformed in different states was a long effort in itself. For example, when we went by saying that, no, this is so we can give the price on the web in the village and this is how the quality testing happens and so on. The natural question on part of the government was, okay, but what happens if you dupe the farmers by giving a low price as what is the price prevailing in Mandi, and then say that ITC price is better? So first, of course, in any case, when this choice is given to the farmer is still free to decide where he wants to sell. Unlike in a Mandi having sunk a cost, taking the material back is a non-option for all practical purposes. But because the price is getting discovered in the village, the choice exists. But continuing with this anecdote of the government, so the government said, okay, then every day you submit the prices list that you're going to upload on your website of the various mandis, as well as the price that you're going to declare. And once we certify and sign it off, then you can upload. So we said, then it doesn't work. The very purpose with which the real-time price discovery was going to happen in the village is defeated.
Right.
So how do we handle this? Then the other solution which came up in terms of thinking was okay, we upload the prices. You decide whenever you can watch it all the time from your mandi board. And then if you think any of the prices are misleading, that what we are giving, you cancel our license, we don't mind. Because we have no intention of misguiding the farmer. Because like I said earlier, reciprocal dependency is core. Then the government said, yeah, we will do that. But in those days, internet access was still a challenge even in government offices. And they said, okay, we'll put it up, but we are not very familiar and those issues. Then we had to work with them to create that. So in terms of step-by-step how we walked along with the government to deal with the concerns that they had and create. And then after some experience in one season, they went ahead and changed their APMC. So state after state, we had to do it. I mean, those kind of effort, of course, subsequently in 2003, a model act for APMC was prescribed by the central government. Some states adopted, so we expanded to more states. So that journey continued with the new the Trade Commerce Facilitation Act. Once it kind of rules are formulated and some of the opposition which exists is appropriately dealt with and harmonized, taking care of those kind of concerns, much like the example that I gave. Hopefully it is a smoother path and regulation front for everybody else who is participating. Of course, state after state, we walked and created this network already in nearly 21 states by now. Some, of course, more deep and some little lighter, but there's an opportunity to expand. Right. Infrastructure certainly is also was a challenge. So we had to literally become a co-creators and co-researchers with the solar panel companies, the battery pack companies, and with our own ITC Infotech in local language work in a low bandwidth environment. So I think all of this, I mean, how do you get solar panels open? Now, of course, solar technology has evolved. How do you develop solar panels which work in a clouded environment? Because farmers would like to access e-Choupal in the monsoon season a lot more than otherwise. And that's when the clouds are more, and that's when the solar panels won't work and there's no electricity at that point of time when it is cut, how to access. Similarly, creating battery packs in the village which last longer. So I think all of this kind of effort went on. But the most important part is the logistics element. I think some of the core insights came from there, that, you know, the weak logistics infrastructure is what our current intermediaries are making up for. The enormous value that our middlemen add is often misunderstood by the value chain participants, saying that you eliminate the middlemen and the farmers and consumers will be happy. Far from that. Because of our weak logistics infrastructure, banking infrastructure, all of this, these middlemen actually add a lot of value at very, very low cost at each leg of transaction. So we created a model by saying, how do we really integrate ourselves with an informal economy like this? The conventional middlemen, how do they become coordinators? So you're only changing their role from a principal into a service provider. And that's how the logistics problem got sorted out. You disintermediate them from information flow and market signals, which is what is impacting the farmer, but make use of their capabilities in where they're good at in terms of physical flow of goods and logistics and quality assessment before this rapid testing technology is coming up with the new advancements. So all of these activities are things that these people do. So I think it's even more interesting episode. I don't take all the time on some of these kind of aspects, but I think, yeah, it's been a very challenging but very exciting journey that we have had over these 20 years.
Right. Fantastic. So we'll move to our final segment, which is an outlook for the future. This year has been exceptional. It's an understatement to say that things have changed with COVID and so on. So looking into the future, how do you think we can move up the value chain and export more of the finished form of agriculture rather than commodities itself?
Yeah, I think exports, of course, are an imperative for India because we are reasonably well balanced in terms of our production and demand at this time. Of course, some headroom for more demand happens as incomes rise and more people consume more. But our productivity headroom is a lot more than our consumption headroom. So that means if you have to keep the prices attractive and incomes good for the farmers, we have to export. That opportunity to really grab, yes, there is a world demand also. And the issue is in terms of how do we really competitively raise our production so that you are able to export without relying on subsidies from the government. Now, in order to plug into global markets with more value-added products than just commodities, there needs to be a paradigm shift. I mean, conventionally, we have been an exporter of residual commodities, whatever is surplus in a given year because of a better monsoon, or after government has procured lots of grains, you have surplus stock, therefore you subsidize and export. So from that situation, you need to really become a competitive exporter, and that basic paradigm shift will be required. So this would mean essentially a few different things that one has to do. We need to really do a focused effort at what are the value chains where we have a comparative advantage as a nation, plugging into global value chains for the value added, whether it is, let's say, marine and seafood, both because of our great aquaculture as well as the long coastline, our diversity of horticulture crops that we have both for fresh produce and processed, our unique position in spices, are in basmati rice. There are a number of value chains where India has got a great advantage.
Right.
And there is a good upside. So need to plug into global value chains and then keep pushing into the next step of what further value-added process we can deliver there with the kind of policy which moves away from a residual exporter. And the last export policy had recognized some of it. The second bit is that having recognized, identified that set of crops. In fact, recently, the 15th Finance Commission had created a high-level expert group and sought a report on what can be done to do this precisely because of this imperative. And the chairman of ITC was the chairman of that group, and therefore I happen to be associated with that work in supporting that group. So the conclusion there was that after identifying these high potential products with comparative advantage and plugging into these value chains, all the resources then need to be developed holistically for the value chain. A couple of times I talked about how we need to do in an integrated manner. So very similar kind of effort has to happen here. An integrated effort in terms of producing right varieties of crops, following appropriate hygienic conditions and subsequent processing, and reducing the logistics cost. I mean, logistics cost, for example, in India is about 14% of GDP. Right. A global average about 6 or 7%. I mean, agriculturally, most competitive countries are at 3 or 4%. So I think that headroom needs to then bring in those investments. And therefore, that convergence of resources on one side from the market-oriented private value chain participants to connect with the market and these investments in processing and logistics, from the government for the other core infrastructure in terms of irrigation and roads and those kind of infrastructure, and from the farmer side aligned with this demand to be able to improve the productivity. So therefore, this convergence of the resources for solving for the whole value chain holistically is the other step. And when these are orchestrated like a public-private producer partnerships, then you are able to align and in a very mission mode, access this global demand that exists. So I think some of the reform that we have just seen, as well as potentially, hopefully the Finance Commission had taken note of these inputs, and they also now, I know that have submitted their report to the government. And when I think some of these things hopefully are taken on board, then I think the whole environment also becomes more conducive for this.
So much of what you're saying will require a mindset shift itself with the stakeholders in the business, right? So how should Indian farmers, what should they focus on, and how should they think about their farming as such in this new business environment?
So one aspect obviously needs to be, how do I produce in a demand responsive manner? So looking at the future of demand through many of these instruments which will get created, especially when there are clusters, obviously the first set of action can happen there because it's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight. Therefore, by identifying clusters, the benefit is that in a focused manner, different crop value chains and farmers there can get impacted. So therefore, first shift is, how do I become more future demand responsive than a past price linked production plan? And demand responsive would also mean those varieties and crops is one element. The second aspect obviously is the productivity. And through these clusters and partnership that I talked about, the productivity needs to be higher because that's what brings the competitiveness. But along with productivity, an important element is that do it in an ecologically sensitive manner. So because of the subsidies in water and electricity, we have been over exploiting water in many regions. There are solutions like micro irrigation, better agronomic practices to reduce water consumption and yet produce better crops and higher productivity. So I think that is the other dimension which must really happen. But most importantly is to improve the bargaining power by coming together and farming FPOs and engage with these value chain participants with a stronger ability. Therefore, FPOs or any other form of collectives as appropriate for the respective crop. There are self-help groups which operate for certain activities. There are cooperatives for some, farmer-producer companies for other, are simply clubs coming together to harness this any which way, both in collective operation, either for physical activities or for accessing information and knowledge and bargain collectively. So I think that would be the other mindset change. Rather than think for myself, see the benefit for myself with the benefit of the larger group coming together. So I think that would be the other element besides this market-oriented effort.
Right. So final question to you. You mentioned, technology disruption and startups and so on. So how can some of the innovators or, startup founders listening to this podcast work with corporates such as yours?
No, we already do work with more than 40 different startups. So it is just reaching out to me, and then I'll point to right people in my team, depending on the solution that there is. And similarly, there are other solutions integrators too, who are evolving. So it could be any of them. So it's in terms of thinking about their own solution as to what it is doing, how it is benefiting farmer, at what stage one is in terms of translating the technology into a farmer solution and creating a business model out of it. So we, of course, engage with many of the startups, even in those phases also, because it's great tech ideas, but not enough understanding about the farmer. So putting them in touch with farmer, refining solution over multiple iterations, brainstorming with them to create business models. When do you charge? How do you charge? Who do you charge? Some of these are not easy questions to answer. So how do you really accelerate that learning is the other effort. So starting from there, and of course, plug and play into our network to be able to deliver those solutions is the other bit. So if you have an idea, reach out and ask. That's the only next step.
Sure.
And because this, again, much like the farmer engagement, this is also a reciprocal dependency. A solutions integrator is successful when we can host a lot of right solutions. And we won't be able to be one of those solution providers and so many of them by ourselves. So while we would be also playing point solution roles in certain areas where market is not taking up easily, business models cannot be created easily, because that's the role of a solutions integrator. Because you need to complete a solution from a farmer's perspective.
Right.
If a farmer needs 10 solutions and market has 8, there is no way I'll become a minimum viable or a minimum viable service for the farmer unless I have all 10 of them. So we do work on a couple of them ourselves, but we are more than happy to work with interested startups.
All right, fantastic. So this has been a fascinating conversation. I think perhaps one of the most holistic overviews of the sector itself. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with us and helping us with all of these insights. We wish you and ITC all the best in any future endeavors.
Thanks, Roshan. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay. Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharat Varta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.